Hello, Future Tribe. Welcome to another episode of the Future Tribe show. I am Jermaine,
I'm Kelsey.
and today we've got, I think we counted about 13 or 14 different news items, including Qatar's tourism or marketing rebrand, the FIFA Women's World Cup logo that's going to be in Australia and New Zealand. So it'll be interesting to take a look at what they've decided the logo should look like. Instagram introducing an Add Yours sticker. Um, we also want to talk a bit more about Facebook's Meta rebrand. I think it was quite new last week when we sort of talked about it, but there's a bit more that I want to add to it that we've learned over the last week. Facebook's also stopped facial recognition, which I think is an interesting move. Um, Microsoft is the world's most valuable company now, beating out Apple, and Microsoft's acquired Clipchamp. What else are we talking about, Kelsey?
Yeah, we've got a couple of things from Google today, talking about sort of page experience and analytics, Google My Business profiles, Google Ads, and some scamming news. Google launching some page speed insights, and also Google is recommending placing videos on their own page. And we'll be finishing off by talking about Yahoo saying goodbye to China.
Yeah, they're leaving China completely. This one's going to be a meaty episode. Let's get the intro rolling and get into it.
Sounds good.
All right, so the big one start off with is the Qatar rebrand. For anyone watching, let me share what that is looking like at the moment. What are your thoughts, Kelsey?
So I quite like it. I have had a look through that extra information. I think it's just nice and simple, slightly modernized, but they've still kept a touch of, I guess, the history of Qatar. They've sort of, they've kept the Arabic part of the logo and actually emphasized a little bit more, which I think is really great. Yeah, I quite like it. I think it's really nice.
Yeah, these sorts of tourism or like national brands are always interesting to me because you you sort of want to represent your country, but at the same time, you need to look at what your you want to say to the potential sort of demographic. Now, did they? So this is by the Qatar Tourism Council, but did they sort of talk about anything particular around boosting tourism? Um, yeah, okay. So as of 2017, they were sort of prioritizing tourism as a sector of pursuit. Because I only know Qatar, or like my biggest familiarity with Qatar is around their clout in the business world and their ownership of or the money they pump into football or soccer as a soccer fan, and looking at it from a potential tourist destination point of view, or if I'm the target demographic, it doesn't really tell me much. Would you agree with that?
I mean, yeah, but how much do you want a country name logo to tell you? I don't think you want it to be jam packed with lots of imagery because it's the name, it's the brand of the country name, and then the other supporting materials that come with it is the thing that will convince you. I think this is just obviously the starting point.
Yeah, have they? So, okay, yeah. So the focus has been refining the branding, really, at this stage, which is fair enough. I think the final, the co-branding sort of looks pretty nice. Obviously bilingual there, which is nice. The patterns are
Hmm.
quite nice as well. It's tough because representing a whole nation, like you think branding a company is difficult. Imagine branding a whole country.
Yeah, it would be impossible. I do want to note these ones that are on the screen at the moment for people that are watching the video. I think are absolutely beautiful. The sort of magazine full page things. I think a lot of the times when it comes to country branding, a lot of countries can kind of, or like tourism branding, I should say, they can try to overcomplicate this sort of magazine things and try to jam pack it with all sorts of different imagery. But what they've done in those magazine pieces above just here is they've kept it really nice and simple. I love that they've got some sort of modern architecture that's it's still got that traditional feel, and you can sort of still tell it's that kind of country. But I just love the simplicity in it and the colors and the sort of composition of them. I just think it's beautiful.
Yeah. While I didn't necessarily buy the logo, um, I want to visit Qatar now.
Yeah, I
the
think
the
the best
imagery
thing
is
about the
beautiful.
logo is that it's really simple, so it does work in all of that supporting stuff. As you mentioned, like as you said, the logo doesn't give you much, but when it's in this context, it doesn't pull away from the imagery, and I think that's really important. And I also love, as I sort of mentioned, they've still got the Arabic and they've highlighted the Arabic and also kept the English. And I think sometimes that can look complicated because there's two different things going on, but they've done it really nicely and it ties in really nicely.
They have, and the imagery they've used, the juxtaposition is, I mean, it's stunning. Like they've really shown restraint here. Getting these photos would have been not a small task, not an easy task. I'd be very surprised if these didn't require a lot of editing in post to sort of get this. Like if it, whether what they're showing, especially in what we're looking at the moment with sort of a boat and an amazing modern skyline in the back, and then um, uh, uh, some sort of wild animal in the desert. It's it's the kind of thing that I would think is hard to just photograph, that you need to sort of manipulate in post. But what it accomplishes is, I think, a really fantastic message around showing restraint. We've talked about it a fair few times around simplifying things and sort of condensing things as much as possible. And they've then supported with the taglines that again are smart, is probably the best way I can put it. It's succinct, it's intelligent, and it's just letting the imagery do the talking. Particularly things like 1400 years of art in one day is sort of tells you a lot more than you would think 6 or 7 words can tell you. Um,
Mm-hmm.
so they've, yeah, I guess I'm taking back everything I said at the start. it, though I guess, yeah, it doesn't mean that the logo says more. It just, I think, means that I'm just conceding. I think that it overall they've done a very good job, and it's a reminder to look past just the logo and look into
Yeah,
the
I was going to
whole.
say it's an important lesson, I think, in when you're talking about logos, understanding that a logo is just one part of the brand. And it is really important that your logo doesn't need to communicate absolutely everything. It just needs to represent one thing and work well within the rest of the branding and the supporting collateral that comes with it. Because once you've got that entire picture together, it works and it's great.
Yeah, exactly. And it's sort of about the execution overall rather than the logo by itself. Because in a lot of instances, it's how you pull that whole representation off that matters. Um, all right, on from Qatar to the FIFA Women's World Cup logo. These are the only two sort of logo slash refreshers slash brands we have to talk about this week. Been a bit light on that sort of news lately.
Yeah, I think we had a week a couple of weeks ago that had like 6 or 7 massive rebrands, and since then it's just been absolutely quiet.
Yeah, but that's it's just maybe that time of year everyone sort of got it out of the way prior to the Christmas period potentially.
Mm-hmm.
Um, so this one here is sort of showing the France 2019 logo next to the AUNZ or Australia New Zealand 2023 logo. I I think historically I've found the World Cup logos, much like the Olympics, much like any sort of sports event, quite an interesting study in how you represent something like that visually as a logo, because really it doesn't change that much. I mean, you change the country, but you don't change much else.
Hmm.
So to me, it's a bit complicated, this new one.
Yeah. When I saw it, like I'm not familiar with football, soccer, whatever you call it. That's not really my sport. I'm definitely into other sports more so. So I'm coming from a very outside perspective, but I think every time I see FIFA World Cups or women's football World Cups, they seem to be quite complicated to me. And this one in particular, I mean, coming from Australia and also being familiar enough with New Zealand, I don't know what the connection is with the colours. I don't really know what that's trying to communicate. I can see that it's a
Here we go.
soccer, football in there. What are the colours saying?
Okay, so let's look into it. So there's squares representing 32 countries that will compete for the World Cup. Then there's colors. They're calling them shared colors. Australia and New Zealand are home to some of the world's most distinct and inspiring natural landscapes and world-class cities. The color palette is vibrant and unique, going beyond the host flags and drawing from the rainforest, earth, mount. Gosh, so they're just saying that they're just colors that are everything to everyone. Um,
Yeah.
there's then a football at the core that,
Mhm.
and it's all a circle because it's representing coming together. Then there's bold typography underneath all. I've already described 4 different elements, and then there's bold typography underneath that, and then there's a simplified version of the World Cup trophy, that the Women's World Cup trophy, and then
Mhm.
further on underneath that, there's the AUNZ 2023 wording, with underneath that, half of that sort of area is the New Zealand artistic pattern, whatever that means, and the Australian artistic pattern, whatever that means as well. I think, oh man, you you would think that this was designed by a uni student, especially the way that they've brought in how many different elements, and no
Yeah.
offense to uni students, but come on.
It feels like there was an assignment brief that, tick off all these symbolistic elements. And I think that this is a case of what seems to happen a lot when it comes to these kind of like sporting competitions and things. They just get so complicated because they're trying to do so much, like representing all the countries, representing two different countries' patterns going into the earth and rainforests and seas and all of that sort of stuff, and just doing so much. And I don't know if it needs to be that complicated. Like I don't hate it. It's not sort of super offensive to look at, but I just don't know why it has to be so complicated.
There's also a lot, like they've built out a lot of visual imagery. I think I thought I saw further up that it was designed by, the identity for the ninth edition has been designed by LA based Works Collective, and then they collaborated with a Toronto based
What?
agency, which
Why
I'm
is it
sorry,
if we're
but
coming to Australia, New Zealand, why are we not employing, I don't know, Aboriginal artists or something? I mean, I'm sure they would have had to for part of it, but
well, yeah,
why are we
further
using
down,
American based companies for
The
this?
North American, yeah. I just don't. So yeah, that they apparently worked with this Australian Indigenous, potentially, I think Indigenous artist,
Hmm.
and this Kiwi artist again. I think maybe Maori. I don't know. I mean, There's no way to say, and I'm not going to make any assumptions. Um, yeah, she's just referenced as, well, they're both referenced as local artists. Um,
Why are we not employing local companies,
Agency. We've got the
agencies to do
ability,
this?
and I do feel like they really missed the mark here, because the this shape, the for those who are not watching, it's essentially like a round circular shape that vaguely represents a soccer ball or football that also has a bunch of colors that's supposed to represent apparently everything, and then 32 little squares around that's supposed to represent the nations being involved. Like, to me, that alone is too much for a logo,
Yeah.
let alone then jumping with the wording underneath and then finally representing Australia and New Zealand in a way that I think is quite weak.
Yeah. They've kind of just thrown that pattern behind the AUNZ and the 2023 to say, yep, here's the country's stuff. And I know that they say that the colours are in the circular part, the colours of, I don't know, I guess rainforests and pink salt
So
lakes, maybe.
natural occurrences that almost every continent can say that they have.
Yeah. I
It's not
just,
unique. Like, the rainforests are not unique to Australia.
no. We've got some beautiful
The
ones, absolutely, but there's many countries that do.
100%, you may have heard of the Amazon before. Um, it's sort of it's
Mm,
sort of a very popular rainforest. Yeah, I just don't know. I feel like generally it's very hard to comment on branding for things like World Cups and sporting events because what do you represent? It's the same thing every X amount of years. Um, and you need to then look at what is unique about that. And to me, that is where it's being hosted. It can't be who's being involved because that is often not finalized until there's playoffs and so on and so forth. Um, Overall, they've yeah. If you look at sort of the supporting design, I guess you would call it, they've really missed the mark. Like, they're calling out rainforests, water, world-class cities, mountains. Like, what
it's
is
all
that?
very,
Is that what? Very generic. Is that we could have
mm,
applied all of this to any other country or city in the world. And then the only unique part is the beautiful, beautiful sort of local art from Australia and New Zealand that is genuinely beautiful. Potentially the challenge or the risk that they didn't want to, well, because they're from overseas, they don't understand what the local market's going to sort of accept. Maybe they didn't want to go too much the other way, potentially.
mm,
But a very easy way to avoid that is just to get local artists from each of the nations to collaborate. Australia, New Zealand, we collaborate all the time. Australia steals Kiwi actors and actresses and technologies and claims them for our own. I'm sure we could
yeah.
have found a way to work together. It's just don't
Mm,
understand. But a message I think here to just work with organizations who have relevant market knowledge. I mean, when we get asked to work with um, you know individuals from overseas for overseas markets, it's something that I hesitate to do because we just don't have. I mean, we can apply general knowledge, like we've got. I would say we'd be better than sort of someone with less experience, but still not as good as someone who's got local experience.
yeah. There's so many case studies that I've read of massive companies trying to branch out into a new country and just not understanding the marketing and this, like the everything. Like I think it even happened. I mean, it's slightly different, but the Five Guys burger chain that opened up in Australia, and Australians just went, "This is rubbish," like because we love our burgers. And I think Five Guys just didn't understand that, and they didn't adapt their offering to understand the Australian market. And that's coming from quite a large chain. Like it can happen so easily just because you don't
Starbucks is,
work
I think,
with
another
the
example.
local. Exactly. Yeah. They just didn't do the correct research. And it even happened, I think, when Bunnings opened up in the UK. There just wasn't a demand for it. They didn't do their research. It flopped pretty hard. And it was just a case of work with the local markets, work with local agencies, whoever it is, to actually understand what's going on. Don't just assume the model that's working in one country will work in another. It's just not going to happen.
I think it's a great example too of, we Australia is part of the West as a generic sort of collective term, and a lot of people think the West is the same. Like, you can go to the US, you can go to the UK, and you can go to Australia and parts of Europe, and get the people are sort of similar and have a similar reaction, but this is a reminder that that's not the case. Even in Australia, between Sydney and Canberra, um, we're 3 hours apart. But I would say, in some cases, we're completely different individuals, and how we like things is completely different. Um, I'm not happy with it. I don't think, as a football fan, it just does too much and gets
Hmm.
nowhere. I think that's an interesting juxtaposition with the Qatar logo, where Qatar just didn't bother trying to represent everything and instead used the sort of other elements and used the opportunity to expand upon it, and did it really, really well. Moving on to Instagram introducing an Add Yours sticker.
Hmm.
What's going on there?
Yeah, so it seems like Instagram is just rolling out a whole host of different things we spoke about. I think it was the collab feature that they introduced last week. So this Add Yours sticker, I'm not 100% sure on how it works, but it seems like you can put up a story and put up a sticker, and it's, let's say, outfit of the day or whatever sort of concept idea you want to come up with. And your friends and followers can use that same thread essentially to upload their own image. And it all gets joined in this one sort of sticker and will show up all the other profiles that are posted under that sticker. So it seems like Instagram's really trying to focus on collaboration and like really making it interconnected between followers, partners, whoever it is. I just thought it was an interesting feature. It's not really something I'd seen before. I'm not sure how I, in my personal life, would use something like that because I can't really see myself jumping on it. Actually, well, I mean, in saying that, I went to a wedding on the weekend and I was just thinking we were asked, obviously, not to take photos because that was professional photographers. But in a circumstance like that, you could have sort of like a birthday tag or a wedding tag or something, and everyone at that event could post photos and stories. Maybe that
Yeah,
would be
it
a use case for it.
could be used across, like, this is my dog, like, upload photos of your dog,
Yeah.
or this is my insert anything almost here. Um, the fact that they're creating like a public thread makes me think of Twitter and how Twitter sort of lets you comment publicly. I am not a huge Twitter user. I've found that thread system to be a little bit confusing because you're sort of starting with one thing, and then the further you go down, the more removed I feel
It
like you
just
get from
gets
the original.
insane. Yeah, I see it
Yeah,
happen on Reddit even, and you just end up with all these different
yes,
conversations, and it's like, what's happened? Where are we?
yeah,
Mm.
which I wonder, I mean, I assume that this is part of stories, so there'd be a 24-hour window there. Um, I'm not a I know you like using stories, Kelsey, and I get
Hmm.
and I get the value around it, but I feel like around things where you're asking people to essentially submit their own thing, there might be something to be said for keeping those like responses around for longer than 24 hours, um, to build out. Could you imagine a Facebook group where every post only lasts 24 hours and then you lose that value essentially that you're trying to
Hmm.
create? But then again, maybe Instagram isn't trying to create value, it's just trying to increase collaboration between users and sort of that social slash community effect. Maybe that's their focus.
Yeah, I mean, I think when it comes to stories, they really are intended to just be that 24-hour. It's like short, sharp, don't think about it kind of thing. It's temporary, and that's the point. So I think trying to build out that sort of archive or whatever doesn't really apply in this circumstance. Um, Yeah, and I mean, I think when it comes to posting stories and things, you usually save the photo anyway, so it's not like it's going to disappear forever. It's just not going to be live forever.
Well, the collaboration with everyone though, like, this is my, Saturday morning. Um,
Mm.
Add yours, but then you lose the real benefit to it. Um, but and it yeah, just makes me wonder, like, that the difference between Facebook and Instagram is increasingly like becoming weirder, artificially weird. I think, like, they're adding the collab features and things like that, and it's sort of like they're trying to keep them separate intentionally, versus
Mhm.
because you could see them converging, right? Like, really. I'm not
Hope
sure
they
why they
don't.
wouldn't. Well, if they were Google, I reckon they would have done something like that already.
Mm.
But
Yeah, I
um,
think I like the approach that Instagram's taking because it feels like it's more of a conversational kind of app versus permanent stuff. It's not like building out. I mean, obviously you've got your feed, but I think when it does come to these stories and temporary collabs and all of that, it's like you've got to see it live. It's like you're part of the conversation there in person rather than just looking at it later kind of thing. And I think
a bit
I
more
do enjoy
Twitter-like,
that.
isn't it?
Yeah.
Like just like join the conversation for the moment or for the 24 hours.
Yeah.
I just looked it up as well. I think the other thing is that Facebook has twice as many users as Instagram.
Mm.
Um,
Active though?
yeah,
Okay.
yeah,
Because I know
which
there's
doesn't
obviously a hell of a
surprise
lot
me.
of inactive Facebook accounts. Yeah.
Yeah, but YouTube's got 2.3 billion. Um, Facebook's number one, I believe, with
Makes
3
sense.
billion. Then it's WhatsApp as third, Instagram as fourth, Facebook Messenger as fifth. So
It's weird.
Facebook is, or Meta is absolutely dominating the space. Um, but it makes me, whoa, Instagram has just 450 employees apparently, which is
Yeah.
like next to nothing.
I mean, that makes sense, I guess, because it's their offering is quite focused. Like they've got a few core things that they do. Facebook obviously has like you go into your extras tab and there's just a million things going
It's
on.
because of everything.
Yeah, Facebook, I mean Instagram stories, feed, direct messages,
That's about it.
sponsorships. Yeah, it's all
Yeah.
very like focused on a couple of products. So I think the support team doesn't need to be as significant as it would for Facebook or other apps.
Yeah, yeah. The whole stickers thing is an interesting concept, I think. And yeah, sort of Instagram's almost becoming like a Snapchat, but in, I don't know, sort of that temporary m- media sort of space.
Mhm.
Because apart from Instagram and Snapchat, I don't think anyone else really does that. Facebook stories don't
No.
don't don't count.
Apparently, WhatsApp is potentially introducing a disappearing kind of message thing. I haven't looked into it, but I did see
Right.
that pop up the other day.
Like a self-destruct, probably. It's like send
Yeah,
this and it, which Snapchat does, I believe.
yeah.
Um,
Everyone's kind of just stealing what Snapchat's done, but doing it better. And Snapchat's sort of just stuck.
S- Snapchat's just doing its thing. Well, I think we talked about in a previous episode about Snap, the company behind Snapchat, um, focusing more on their technologies as I think
Yeah,
a white label provider rather than a social platform in itself.
yeah. Smart
Um,
move.
Talking about Snap and Snapchat, I just wanted to touch on Facebook and Meta. Once when they announced that the Meta refresh or the rebrand of the company, like Alphabet was to Google, um, it was quite fresh when we hopped on this episode. And over the last week, I've done a lot more research, listened to Mark Zuckerberg talking a lot more about their vision. And I just wanted to sort of talk about, I think a lot of people feel like they've rebranded to Meta to get away from all the bad press that Facebook receives. I personally disagree with that. I think it's not a it's not a matter of let's, distract people. I don't think
Yeah.
that works.
No, I feel like they would recognize that changing a brand name isn't going to change, yeah,
The
all of
public
those.
perception.
Yeah, I don't think that that's stupid.
Yeah, no, they're much smarter than that. I think ultimately what it represents, and this has a message for any business owners, anyone who has a brand out there. It's to me representing a, a new clear cut direction, an intention around this is what we're going to do moving forward. This is what we're changing to, and that can be done. They didn't have to do it with a name change. That's a more bold step. They could have done it with a branding, a logo shift or refresh, a brand messaging refresh. So it didn't have to be done with a name, but I think given the gravity of how much they're changing and the fact that the company was called Facebook and the app was called Facebook and they were two different things, it was just made more sense to just let's just change the company name for the moment. Um, but ultimately, the goal, I would say, and the message here is that you too should think about using a logo shift or change to represent something more than just a distraction. Using it to draw a clear line and say, on this date, we're shifting our attention or we're focusing our attention in this direction. I personally bought a website that I think I mentioned to you as well, Kelsey. And one of the first things that I did when I bought that website was change the look and feel, and I'm going to rebrand it in my own time over the next few weeks, again to represent this website that I purchased was sort of quiet for the last 6 to 8 months. By purchasing it, I want to represent that, hey, this is a new chapter. I purchased it from someone who wasn't as ingrained in the topic of this website as much as I am, and it just represents this is it. This is the line. It's sort of like um, you know before and after, and everything after is different. Um, One interesting thing that I've picked up with Facebook's Meta rebrand is that Mark Zuckerberg's talking a lot about the augmented reality, virtual reality side of things, which we touched on quite extensively. But he's also trying to take on the subscription commissions that companies like Apple are taking. It's been a topic for the last few years because Apple's had um, a lot of competition. People sort of taking them to court about it. And Mark Zuckerberg's like, it's just too much of a cut, and really sort of trying to hop on that bandwagon. But to me, it's a very old school tactic of essentially undercutting the competition. So, going, all these companies are fantastic, but let's go. We don't need 30%. We'll take a smaller cut, similar to what Hyundai and Kia did in the Australian market, where they went, you can have more warranty for less cost, and we'll just stick it to the incumbents until we get to a point where we've got enough market penetration that we are just going to be priced like everyone else, which is where Hyundai and Kia are now. Um, so to me, it's interesting to see a big company like Meta take this approach, but then again, they've clearly expressed that they're happy to essentially break even, and because their advertising business makes so much money, and that's just, they don't have to focus on that, right? They can just keep that going. People are going to buy ads, and they just break even on what this new direction, so that when the time comes, they're the Microsoft, or they're the Apple of, or in fact, they're the Facebook, or Meta is the Facebook of this new chapter.
Mhm.
Um, because I think you'd agree that Facebook really owns social media, and they might not have been the first, but they definitely are the biggest and quote unquote the best.
Yeah, I mean, they're definitely the first of the current generation because I think before that it was MySpace, which obviously RIP. Although it might still be
Well,
up, I don't know.
I think that they got bought and they became like a music sharing sort of service slash
Hmm,
platform. Um,
interesting.
yeah, but I guess the message there is that Facebook's a mainstay in the social media space, and they want to become, I was talking about sort of that operating system for your social life, and it's very clear that that's what they're doing, and what they're willing to lose money now, to, let's be honest, make more money later, by dominating that market. Um, Something interesting or something new to come out of Facebook as well is that they plan to shut down their facial recognition systems, which I haven't uploaded photos to Facebook in a long time, but I do remember when they used to pick up and go, "Oh, looks like your friend Kelsey
Yeah.
Allen is in this photo. Do you want to tag her?" Um, I just thought it was interesting that they are killing that altogether,
Hmm.
because I don't know. Is this one a bit of a bait and switch? Because, like, hey, we're cutting facial recognition. Maybe they don't need to do facial recognition anymore because they have
Yeah.
so much information on every other facet of your life.
I mean, what benefit does facial recognition give the user, for one, besides helping them tag photos easier? And what kind of information? I mean, I'm sure Facebook would get information from it, but as you said, they've got that much information. How much more does facial recognition add? It just seems like, I don't know, a redundant feature seems wrong, because I'm sure that there's a place for that, because that was such a like groundbreaking kind of technology, I guess, when it first came out. But it could also be they're they're trying to rebuild a bit of trust in users. So by saying we're cutting facial recognition, people go, "Oh, cool, they're respecting my privacy more." You know.
I think facial recognition as well was a feature, to your point, that was more in your this is like, it's not a pun, but it was more in your face, right? It was like, here, look at us. It's sort of like when Google says, this is how much, you traveled last week, and sort of really goes, hey, look, we are tracking where you're going, and
Mhm.
here it is, just laid out in front of you. I think if the facial recognition side of things is like, hey, look at how much we know. But by getting rid of it, that's why I think it's a bit of a bait and switch. It's sort of hiding how much Facebook really knows. Ultimately, all these organizations know more about us than any government ever could.
Mhm.
I would think, and this is just them, maybe appeasing the public, like you're suggesting.
Yeah.
Um, an interesting move, nonetheless, because I mean, maybe there just wasn't enough financial value around it. Like, what does knowing someone's face do for you when you know their hobbies, where they go, what they like, what they
Mm.
want to buy, who they're friends
It's
with?
probably yeah. It seems like the least valuable data point.
Though
It
at one
seems
point it probably
yeah.
was the most valuable because that was probably the most they knew at one point. But it's a
Yeah.
different story now.
Yeah.
Um,
Exactly.
Moving on to Microsoft becoming the world's most valuable company, beating out Apple. It's always like a 1-2 like fight between them.
Mhm.
And what I like about, or what I liked about this story and the fact that you put it in the notes was that they're such different organizations. Like
Mhm.
Microsoft hasn't had, I would say Apple's done really, really well with their um, like tech products, the iPhone and so on and so forth, and they've done really well with that. But Microsoft hasn't had a product like that forever. Like they never really, I mean, they had Windows, but apart from that,
Yeah.
they didn't have they failed in almost every other aspect, yet they're really sticking it to Apple, like as such a
Mhm.
big company. And it's just a message around the fact that you don't need to be necessarily at the top of everyone's mind, and you don't necessarily need to be in the news all the time. If you can
Yeah.
become the central, reliable nervous system to more people, become the pickaxe for the gold miners, not the gold miners themselves, because guess what? You can supply every single gold miner, whether they find gold or not, you're going to do well.
Mhm.
Whereas if you want to go mine for gold, yeah, sure, you'll probably hit it big if you find gold, but what happens to the majority that don't find gold? That sort of
Yeah.
message.
The thing I think is interesting is if you sort of look back on Microsoft and Apple from the start, Microsoft and Apple at one point were competing in operating systems before we had sort of iPhone, iPad, blah, blah, blah. And then Apple took off with those extra products. Microsoft tried to compete and just couldn't quite compete as much in that space. And now they've got a new CEO. I can't remember when she came in. I think it's in the article. But their new approach is essentially to be boring, as I mentioned previously. Um,
Hold on, are you
and I
talking about
think
Satya Nadella?
maybe,
I don't think they've changed since Satya Nadella. I thought,
oh, maybe I read that wrong.
well, when Satya Nadella became CEO of Microsoft, when was it? Um, 2018.
Okay, like fairly
So
recently.
recent history, for sure, for sure.
Yeah. In terms
Um,
of sort of CEOs coming in and coming up with a new strategy, that's quite recent because it does take that time to come in, find out what's going on, implement things. And obviously, the boring strategies paid off for them. They've just made products that are reliable and accessible in terms of, I mean, if you look at the Surface, I think they've got various levels of Surface that are really accessible at all kind of price points. They've just got the Xbox doing its Xbox stuff, all the operating systems, things like that. They've just not tried to be fancy and crazy branded and all that sort of stuff. They've just made
or
good.
viral as well, I would say.
Mm,
Not that they haven't tried to be. I think if they could have been, like, they tried with the Zune, they tried with what, Windows Phone, they've tried. Um,
hmm.
but I think what they've done instead is become, like, they've got Microsoft Azure, they've got 365, they've got sort of, they compete with Google and Amazon in a way that Apple just simply cannot, and no one looks at Apple as a enterprise solutions provider.
No,
I mean,
because
they want
they're
to
too
be.
focused on the products, and that was great for them. But I think at this point, that's where they're going to sit sort of stagnant until they start innovating in other things and introducing products that don't have notches that break and things like that.
Well, they've to me, Apple's always put design ahead of, um, function's the wrong word, but I don't know. They've always seemed to prioritize design, is what I would say. Um,
Mm,
where Microsoft has just wanted to be that classic, always there, just reliable as much as possible. Um, Saying that though, it's in, like, they purchased LinkedIn, they've acquired a lot of other companies, and recently they acquired Clipchamp, which is a online video editor. So to me, it's interesting that they're getting into those spaces because they're all a lot more consumer focused than business focused. Um, but as long as, like, for Apple, they really need a new iPhone, they really need a new MacBook to kick things up a notch, to keep at the very, or just to keep things going, like keep that boat sort of sailing along, where Microsoft has reliable, ongoing income, and they can acquire companies like LinkedIn and Clipchamp that are more consumer focused, but don't necessarily need them to succeed because they've got that reliable income from elsewhere.
hmm. Fair enough.
Yeah, it's just again a message there for those of you who are listening to. It's fantastic going from viral. Don't get me wrong. I think it's something that everyone aspires to do, but you don't need to always go viral. Um, Jumping from that into a lot of Google news. And this again, Google does this every once in a while where they sort of release a bunch of changes, and they love to just go back on what they've done in the past or get rid of products. I can't think of any products that they've gotten rid of recently, but um, they are changing Google My Business. That Google My Business is becoming Google Business Profiles. Google My Business has gone through like 5 different iterations. Do you remember Google Plus?
Oh yeah, was that the network?
Yeah, yeah. So
Oh,
Google My Business used to be Google Plus Local or Google Plus Business. Um, there used to be, like, I think, My Places or Google Places, and now they're
hmm.
becoming Google Business Profile. It's essentially what they're doing is migrating those features into Maps and Google Search. Um, it's been a bit weird because to me it's not the delineation hasn't been quite obvious because Google My Business sort of shows up on Google Maps and shows up on Google Search, but doesn't really exist on its own. I know you can do like posts through Google My Business, but it's really just meant to help you manage your business profile, which makes, or your profile, um,
Hmm.
for an entity, whether that's a business or whatever else. So it makes sense that they've shifted this way. Um, but it's still unclear how, like, for us, we've got a lot of clients, definitely in the double digits that we manage through Google My Business. I wonder how that will change. I wonder how that sort of representation of Google My Business, because they swap into profiles. Do we then become like a profile manager and manage multiple profiles? Yet to see. Um,
Mm.
on top of that, um, Google has done a few things around pages and how they look at pages. So they're launching a new version of Page Speed Insights, which historically Google's really popular for launching tools that are half baked and confusing at best. Like I mentioned a website that I purchased earlier on, and I was looking at it through Google Page Insights, and it was sort of giving me a bad score, but it wasn't really telling me how I can improve the score, for example, which is just poor experience because they're like, yeah, you're getting 17 out of a possible score of 100, and these are some general ways to sort of improve it, but there it's not immediately obvious how much of an improvement those things would lead to. Um, and I'm hoping with this new version that they've shifted from a tool that most people, even we used to say, just ignore page speed insights, just use these other tools, third party tools, because they were better. They gave you more information, actionable information. So maybe Google's sort of taken a page out of sort of those different books and integrated that in. And as an extension of that, they're talking about using page experience to rank desktop sites. They've shifted to a mobile first experience, or ranking system. Um, and to me, what that really means is that we're going to see less websites that are negative experiences. Like I've been on websites that every time you click a link, it pops up an ad before you go to
Mhm.
the next page. Like that's just frustrating, right?
Yeah, it is. So I think the page experience stuff, it was something they had rolled out on mobile, I think around August maybe. So in November or this month, they're going to be pulling it out on desktop sites. So it is really going to take into account how quick your website is to load, how responsive it is, and that visual stability is what you mentioned when you go on a page and you go to click on something and then the page jumps and you've clicked on something else and it just oh, it kills
Uh,
me. But it's really good because that means that Google will start penalizing those sites, so you're going to have a much better viewing experience on both mobile and desktop soon, because the sites that are showing up are going to be the ones that don't have those issues. So it's exciting. Also a good note, if you do have a website, to make sure that you don't have those issues and try to minimize that. And it tends to happen when there's like, if you've got banner ads, let's say, at the top of your website that change sizing, stuff like that, make sure you fix those.
or like things, like big assets that take a little while to load. Like we've seen clients with sites where they have a big image in the header and the image doesn't load for another 5 seconds because it's 5 times the size of the whole website, or the homepage. And Google, sorry, is essentially saying you need to prioritize experience. So don't have big images, and if you do, use there's all sorts of different ways that we can sort of compress them and deliver them differently. Some, like the worst examples of websites, Kelsey, I don't know if you've seen this before, they load and then they blink as they swap the font to like the font that it's meant to be, and
Mm-hmm.
things like that. When a slow website that swaps all the fonts, so the whole page loads, then it takes about 2 seconds to swap the fonts over and it resizes again. Just avoid all that where you can. And if you're listening to this and you're not sure if your website has a bad experience, open it up in an incognito window, open it up using a different browser, and think about as well, testing it with like an ad block, for example, enabled, because all those things can impact how a user sees your website. And when you're someone who's always working on your website, always loading your website, it might not seem slow because a lot of that information is cached, but a new visitor is not going to have been on your website, inherently have seen your website before. So try and see what they see. Try and see how they experience it, because that's what Google's going to be looking at. They don't care how it reacts to you or how it works for you. They care how it works for the majority of people. Um,
Mm-hmm.
so they're just they're just really going down that road of making, in my opinion, making the web a better place and incentivizing nice websites rather than websites that are designed to make money. Speaking of which, Google Ads has been leading people to like phishing scams, phishing, not
Yeah.
the hobby fishing.
Yeah.
I'm not sure what could you imagine what a phishing scam like I don't know, would you like pay for a weekend away at a fishing spot and then turn up and see that
Maybe.
it's not a fishing, or it's a
It's a
little
big
tub?
industry. I think you could get a lot of people to fall for that.
So it's not that kind of scams, but I wanted to bring this up because it's um silly at the very least. Um, Getting approved on Google Ads, getting ads approved can be really tough. So I don't know how, like, we've certainly had legitimate clients with legitimate, like, sending them to product pages, sending visitors to product pages get sort of um, manually reviewed, and us having to sort of struggle through that in the past, and that's with ads accounts that manage multiple, like, and have been managing multiple accounts that have been doing in good standing, never had issues. So with us having some sort of history, I don't know how these scam sites get through. Just
Mm. I
doesn't
mean,
make
I
any
guess they'd
sense.
be good at what they do because they'd be scamming the people reviewing the ads as well.
True.
Mm.
Fair point. I guess it's the people behind Google are people, so maybe that's what it is, or maybe they
Yeah.
have software doing some of these reviews, and if you sort of work out what they're looking for and show them what they want to see, they're not people. They're not going to be able to
No.
tell when they're being manipulated. And the last one from the Google News is that they actually recommend placing videos on their own page for maximum impact. Now, this one's interesting because in the example that they've shown us, they've essentially gone title, video, and then text content underneath. It's relevant when we're talking about, like, we were talking about the podcast pages and transcripts this morning. So in this instance, we would certainly be looking at restructuring the page layout so the videos from the podcast episodes are at the top with text underneath. I can see why Google wants to promote that as well, because chances are you're going to be hosting on YouTube. And if you're driving people to a video and the video's at the top rather than lost in the middle, that's certainly a good outcome. Um,
Hmm.
so it makes sense, but um, I think it's a bit slightly weird that Google sort of come out and given this sort of information out publicly, because it's the kind of thing that we would have to sort of find by experimenting. Um, but they've just come out and said it. So yeah, heads up
Helpful.
if you've. I think so. Yeah. I
Hmm.
don't know whether we probably don't have a lot of articles with videos in the middle of the page, but if we do, we'd need to look at how we can restructure it. A lot of review websites have videos down the middle, like towards,
Hmm.
like, you'd be reading like a review on Sony's latest headphones and find the video review in the middle of a text article. So maybe incentive for them to put the video up the top so that, like, that sort of multimedia is presented first. Um,
Hmm.
and maybe Google's also finding, in fact, I'd say almost certainly that video engagement's higher than text engagement. And this is just Google incentivizing that further.
Yeah, I would be keen to see the videos at the top because there's a lot of times I'll go to, I think even news articles, and the news sites will have ads, and there's like maybe two videos in the article. One of them is an ad, and one of them is the actual video I want to watch, and I can never tell which it is. And I start watching one, and I wait for the ads to finish, and it's a frustrating experience. Again, talking about experiences on websites, and probably Google saying if you put it at the top, people will know this is the video to watch. Make it nice and easy, and you'll benefit from it. So I'm looking
And,
forward to that change.
and I think, I'm right there with you. And those sites that you play a video, the ads show, and then they become like an embedded picture-in-picture ad on the top right while you watch the video. And some, in the worst case, they compete because the audio from the ad
Yeah,
never stops.
it's the worst.
My goodness, that's It's fantastic for the people making money off those things, but it's
Hmm.
not good for, I would say, not good for literally anyone else, because it
Yeah.
leads me to hate the advertiser as well. So
Hmm.
it's only good for the publisher, because if your advertising, if your video is distracting and annoying and playing over what I want to actually watch, I'm not going to have a good association with your brand. Just putting it
No,
out there.
absolutely.
And the last one, to me, this is not surprising, but quite big news, is that Yahoo is leaving mainland China as of November 1. So it's already happened. That is huge to me. Microsoft last month announced that they're shutting down LinkedIn in China. Um, and the what they're citing is really that they need to share too much data about their
Mm.
users
I
with
was
the
wondering if that was
government.
yeah, because obviously China has a lot of its own internal social channels and things. I wonder if like LinkedIn wasn't competing, and then because of that didn't want to share information. Same sort of thing with Yahoo. It makes sense.
It's a big market though. They have 850 million internet users versus the US that has only 313 million. So
Mm.
by like that is, I mean, that this article is saying that it's more than twice. I would say it's almost three times the users, really, in
Yeah.
China. So
Yeah,
you're
but I mean, if you were to stay in China and China's requesting information about users, would that not be more of a risk to these companies to hand over that data? Because that would also include the data of international people, surely, to continue operating there. And therefore, it's more of a risk for those companies if it were to come out that all this information had been handed over to the government, and then all the users in all the other countries go, "What do you mean you've given my information to China?" No, and then they leave. It's probably, I mean, yeah, I guess that's why they would have done it. A smarter move to leave than risk the other bit.
That's true. It's true, and you're not wrong, but you're then leaving a huge market, and I wonder what'll happen here. Like, is China gonna have, like, China's already got, I've seen references to like blah blah blah, the Google of China, or blah blah blah, the WhatsApp of China. There are lots of apps that aren't necessarily copycats. In fact, some of these apps came before the
Hmm.
Western version of it, or inspired the Western version of it. But yeah, longer term, like, okay, so are we allowing private companies to have all this information about us, but not governments? It's a bigger question, and I think for a long time, a lot of companies have wanted to get into China, and it's interesting to see sort of almost a shift in the other direction.
Hmm. Could be
But
political
mm,
influence as well in the
oh,
current sort of
certainly
climate.
landscape.
Who knows?
Yeah.
Yeah.
But definitely something that I wanted to mention, because I think it's big. Like Yahoo,
Yeah.
I don't think Yahoo's been doing well personally. I don't think, like, I haven't thought about Yahoo for a long time. They sort of got palmed around, had funny rebrands, and haven't been doing well. So for them to leave a big market is a big move. But
Hmm.
I'd be interested to hear, yeah, what other people think. And I don't know many who operate, like, I don't know personally many companies, or individuals who operate within the Chinese space, but um, certainly interesting, especially given like the fact that China, like Huawei, for example, Huawei's Chinese, isn't it?
Yeah, I think so.
I think so. Yeah. So like Huawei, for example, got banned. Like, isn't we were just talking about this the other day as well? Like, they're not really. They've lost their presence in the Western world when they used to dominate that. Like, at one
Hmm.
point, they partnered with Google to build a Google phone,
Yeah.
and I had that phone. It was awesome. Um, so it's definitely politically motivated, but I wonder, yeah, it's a big battle between government and who gets to have all this data, and countries. Um, the last thing I wanted to mention was a really interesting report, from Search Engine Journal, which is a pretty interesting blog, and website if you are into SEO or search engine optimization. If you have a website, or a business, I think you should sort of pay attention to this. We'll include a link to a report they generated recently. And just a few takeaways, probably nothing that's going to surprise you, Kelsey, but of all SEO activities, content marketing is the most likely to take up the major share of a digital marketing budget and a major share of attention, which I don't see you sort of gasping or looking surprised there at all.
Content is king. That's what they always
That's it.
say.
And no surprise there. Further sort of looking at the results, 33% of SEO pros still think that meta descriptions, titles, H1 tags, and other on-page elements are really important. So it's a bit more technical, but if you're listening and you want to do your own SEO, I guess that's a bit of a message to go. Still look at on-page, on the on-page side of things. Further on from that, 38% of respondents, this is SEO professionals, reported that clients think that SEO is an essential part of marketing. I couldn't agree more. Talking about Google Ads and all those sort of channels, you need to keep focusing on something more. Like, we do a lot of content writing and content publishing, Kelsey, and well, you know that because you manage a lot of it.
Yep.
How much does it cost us apart from time? Like, nothing. And
Nothing.
how long do the effects last? Forever. Like, it's
Hmm.
it's it's a very obvious thing, but it's nice to see that sort of confirmed with a report. One of the interesting things though is that about 40% of respondents see the zero click results as a great threat. So things like Google giving you the answer up the top as a huge threat. So Google essentially cannibalizing their own the industry that sort of helps them sort of continue to be strong, which makes sense. It's this weird position to be in, right? Because you want to rank for things like you want to be the answer and have the answer or be the
And it
search.
does link through as well to the website from that
But
answer.
if you get the answer straight off the
Mm.
bat,
Yeah, I mean, it's probably 50-50. I think in my experience when I've used those answers, it tends to be like I've got part of the answer, and then I'll go, all right, this website knows what it's talking about. I'll get the rest of the answer I need by visiting it. And it probably just depends on how complicated the answer you're looking for is. If it's literally just a one-word answer, yeah, you're not going to have
yeah,
click-throughs. If it's a little more complicated, you're going to get click-throughs. So
100%. But then, or are people going to see your response and go, that was a bit more succinct. I'm just going to look into the other pages, like second or third result, because they might be more detailed, because they might misunderstand that that response isn't the entirety of the response. It's just what Google picked up. Another thing is that over a third of SEO professionals plan to focus on user experience over the next year, which I think is
good.
very relevant. Yeah. In line with what we talked about around what Google's trying to do. So I think all in all, it's a very detailed report. It's 49 pages long.
Oh.
So yeah, you do have to give search engine journal. I think it is your like contact info, company size. It's no doubt a lead gen for them. I don't know what they do though, like with that information, what they're going to try and sell you. So
Hmm.
that's the disclaimer, but it is an interesting report. Gets into the insights, opportunities, and threats. So, if you're a business owner, if you're an SEO professional, if you're in marketing, I think this is something that you should read, just as another data point to inform you moving forward.
Yeah, nice.
Awesome. That's it for this episode. Anything that we've missed or forgotten?
Only thing we haven't mentioned is happy birthday to you, Jermaine. It's your birthday today.
Oh,
So,
well, thank you. Thank you. I was like, what do you there's no more notes, and
I
I'd thrown in a few bonuses as well, so what's going on? But
know.
no,
Yeah, no,
thank
just a little
thanks
mention
for
to say happy birthday, and everyone in the
that.
comments, make sure to say happy birthday as well.
Oh, that's too nice. Well, on that note, let's roll the outro, and we'll talk to you next week.
Cool. Catch you guys next week.
Bye.